When you look across most financial institutions today, it'd be hard to argue that early careers programs aren't measured. There are dashboards, there are summary reports, there are completion statistics and assessment results and satisfaction scores, all of which are reviewed with reasonable frequency, often with a sense that the program's being run properly, that it's structured, monitored, and therefore broadly under control. And because similar metrics are used across the industry, and because peers tend to report in comparable ways and benchmark against similar indicators, it can begin to feel as though aligning to that standard is, in itself, evidence that the measurement framework is sound. But perhaps we need to start challenging that assumption. The question that lingers, and which isn't always asked directly, is whether those metrics are actually telling you what you need to know, or whether they're simply telling you what has traditionally been easy to measure, and as a result, has had the most uptake. The likelihood is that your early careers program is aligned with the industry norm and is still operating at the mean, still leaving deeper insight unexplored, still relying on indicators that confirm activity rather than illuminate capability. For a long time, early careers programs have been evaluated through a relatively consistent set of lenses: attendance rates, completion percentages, exam pass marks, participant feedback, delivery against budget. All of these measures served a purpose. They confirm that the program ran, that participants engaged, that core concepts were tested, that the overall experience was broadly positive. In more centralized, less complex environments, that level of confirmation often felt sufficient. And yet, when you pause for a moment and look at what those metrics actually represent, you begin to see their limits. Attendance confirms presence, but not depth of understanding. Completion confirms exposure, but not integration. A pass mark confirms recall at a point in time, but not necessarily judgment under pressure. Satisfaction scores reflect how participants felt about the experience, which matters, but they don't necessarily reveal whether capability has meaningfully formed. None of this makes traditional metrics wrong. They're of course necessary, and in many cases they're well executed. The issue isn't that they exist, but that they're sometimes treated as the primary indicators of success, rather than as one layer within a broader measurement framework. By digging deeper into the program and interrogating the metrics, you can develop a greater understanding of program success. If we zoom out for a moment, it becomes easier to understand how we arrived here. In the early 2000s, many graduate programs were heavily classroom-based, often centralized, operating in a context where access to structured financial knowledge itself carried weight. Measurement focused naturally on attendance and examinations, because ensuring exposure to core material was the main objective. As the 2010s unfolded and institutions expanded globally, as regulatory expectations intensified and blended learning models became more common, measurement broadened, incorporating more structured assessments and feedback mechanisms became easier. Yet these systems were still largely centered on confirming delivery and testing recall. Then the environment shifted again. Cross-border collaboration became routine rather than exceptional. Regulatory scrutiny remained persistent, capital discipline tightened, and the rise of AI compressed access to information in a way that subtly changed the value equation around knowledge itself. What once differentiated professionals, the ability to recall information, became less scarce, while the ability to interpret, apply, and escalate with sound judgment became more critical. Human skills and human judgment are now one of the major development areas for organizations as they look to develop a competitive advantage. At the same time, as all these developments, cost scrutiny increased, leadership expectations around return on investment sharpened, and early careers programs began to sit more visibly within broader conversations about operational readiness and risk alignment. The context evolved steadily, and yet in many cases the underlying measurement logic moved only slightly. What this creates isn't a failure of oversight, but a gap in insight. Traditional early careers metrics are very good at confirming that something happened, that people attended, that they passed, that they rated the program positively. And that's great. It gives a surface-level understanding of the success of the program, but there's a deeper level of understanding we can generate if we interrogate the information we have in a more intelligent way. What traditional metrics are less effective at revealing is where capability is forming unevenly, whether one region is conceptually lagging another, how applied performance varies across cohorts, or which specific concepts are consistently weak when tested in realistic scenarios. If applied decision-making is inconsistent across streams, would your current dashboards surface that clearly? If escalation judgment differs materially between regions, would that be visible in a way that prompts early intervention? If participants understand regulatory frameworks in theory, but struggle to apply them under simulation or in discussion, would your reporting capture that nuance, or would it remain implicit until it surfaced later in the role? These aren't dramatic breakdowns. They're quieter patterns, and without more structured analytics, they can remain difficult to detect. The limitation, therefore, isn't in effort, but in depth. It's the difference between knowing that a program ran successfully and understanding precisely how capability is progressing within it. In response to this growing complexity, measurement thinking is beginning to evolve. More advanced programs are layering additional forms of analysis on top of traditional indicators, moving beyond point-in-time testing toward more longitudinal, capability-oriented insight. This can involve establishing clearer baselines through diagnostic assessments before and after programs, tracking concept mastery over time rather than relying on a single exam, incorporating simulation-based performance scoring to assess applied decision-making in more realistic conditions, and comparing performance across cohorts and regions to identify patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. It can also mean generating manager-facing reports that translate learning data into operationally meaningful signals, rather than simply summarizing attendance and feedback. The emphasis in these approaches is subtle but significant. The question shifts from, did they complete the module, to, how did they perform when required to integrate and apply the concept? And this is the key point we're trying to make. When the knowledge is applied in practice, does it work? Is it impactful? Is it making the employee better at what they do? Or is it just sitting there idle within your employee, not being applied in a real-world environment? Traditional metrics don't disappear in this model. They do remain part of the picture, but the difference is that they're no longer the only lens through which success is judged. At its core, what we're seeing is a gradual movement from measuring training activity toward generating capability insight, from confirming program delivery toward building operational confidence. In 2026, where global dispersion, regulatory intensity, and technological acceleration define the environment, the assurance provided by surface-level metrics may not always be enough. Early careers programs shape how professionals interpret capital, risk, liquidity, compliance, and escalation from the very beginning of their careers. The data generated within those programs, therefore, carries strategic significance. The question isn't whether you're measuring your program, but whether your measurement framework is calibrated to the complexity of the world your intake is entering. And so, the reflection becomes a simple one. If capability began to drift within your early careers program over the next year, if applied understanding varied meaningfully across regions or streams, would your current metrics surface that insight early enough to act? Or would they continue to reassure you that completion rates remain comfortably high? Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intuition Finance Digest. If you're interested in the world of early careers programs and would like to learn how you can deliver a successful learning project to your organization, visit intuition.com.